The city of Derry, October 5th, 1968. The beginning of the civil rights movement. These are images of one of the first civil rights marches in Northern Ireland. Civil rights, the name and the tactics immediately evokes the southern United States in the 1950s and 60s. In more ways than one, as is plain to see. A non-violent form of protest for moderate reforms, which is met by systematic police violence. Only at this time and in this place, the protesters were white. They were Irish. For most people who know little about Ireland and even less about Northern Ireland, the events of the late 60s are completely baffling. And with good reason, for Northern Ireland is indeed a peculiar state. For over 50 years, one political party, the Unionists, were in power. They had the support of loyalists of all social classes, thanks to a political line that was very simple. Maintain union with England and preserve loyalist supremacy, no matter what the cost. This meant control of all levels of government, the police, the courts, housing, as well as the major sources of employment. In 1968, unemployment in the nationalist community was nearly 25% compared to 6% for the loyalists. On April 24th, 1916, Connolly led the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, in an insurrection in Dublin. But the rebels, besides being poorly organised, had little popular support, and within a week the rebellion had been crushed. And then the British government blundered. 16 rebel leaders, including Connolly, were executed, and thousands of nationalists were interned in prison camps in England. Almost overnight, the Irish people began to give their active support to the IRA.
Was better to die 'neath an Irish sky than at Subler or Soudel Bar.
By 1920, the IRA had developed a highly successful campaign that was to become a model of modern guerrilla warfare. Despite mass arrests, Britain was unable to defeat the nationalists militarily, and the British government was forced to concede a certain measure of independence for the Irish. At the same time, they readily accepted the demands of the loyalists in the north, not to be included in an independent Ireland. Thus, a 26-county Free State was formed in the south, while 6 counties in the north remained under British jurisdiction. The new statelet of Northern Ireland was assured a majority of 1 million loyalists to 500,000 nationalists. The selected 6 counties also happened to contain most of Ireland's industry. But it was only after a bitter civil war among Republicans before conservative nationalists, backed by the British, were finally able to impose the settlement. It was in this way that British economic interests were protected, the IRA neutralised, and Ireland was divided. And for the next 50 years, the Unionists in the north governed through discrimination and police terror. On August 15, 1969, British troops began arriving in Northern Ireland with the announced aim of keeping the peace between the two communities. But in reality, they were there to prop up a state faced with a virtual insurrection. The civil rights movement had suddenly become irrelevant. After August, it was too late for reforms.
However, those people who had initially formed the political core of the Republican Army, reanalysing that situation, that is, the 1969 crisis, realised that the sectarian element was merely a symptom of British imperialist rule, and consequently it was a necessity to reanalyse a response to that symptom. This led to the emergence of what became known as the Provisional IRA, and the Provisional IRA was to be distinguished because it advocated the necessity of an armed struggle to be directed at the main core of the problem, which was British imperialism, and not a reformist approach to sectarianism, which was merely a symptom of British imperialist rule. For us, this war is not just a war of shooting British soldiers. It is also about coming to a final political objective, which is the creation of a 32-county democratic socialist republic to be controlled by the ordinary people for their own benefit.
Stand still, you're under arrest for breaking security.
When following a sectarian attack on one of the nationalist ghetto areas in Belfast, the Short Strand area, the Provisionals were in a position to successfully defend that particular ghetto, where the nationalist people were outnumbered something like 10 to 1. The following week, which was July 1970, in a direct response to the ability of the Republican Army to defend the nationalist ghetto areas, the British Army occupied one major nationalist ghetto area, the Lower Falls. But from the Provisionals' point of view, this was further vindication of why armed struggle was necessary, because this was the first physical manifestation of British imperialism since the 1920s. And for the first time, the people could relate to the Provisionals' claims that sectarianism was in fact just a symptom, and that the main enemy was British imperialism itself. And here was something with which they could identify.
I was down at the corner of Marshton Street about 20 past 12 on Friday night, or Sunday morning. Couldn't get home to my own home. It was only around the corner of Murdoch Street. Seen a man getting shot down, and the ambulance was about 20 minutes coming, and I had trouble getting out with the man. I think the man has since died.
Going to chapel this morning, we were searched, 4 guards, and they weren't even going to let us out to go to chapel this morning.
It was like hell opening for sinners. It was shocking. It was worse than the Battle of Mons. They're going into the houses and wrecking the houses and all. And if you seen that man's house, you could cry your eyes out looking at it.
Friday night at 5:45, my wife took bad. She badly hit with tear gas. She was taken to Royal Victoria Hospital very ill, along with, she was expecting a baby. Baby was born at 3:15 the next morning. Baby's still very ill, along with the wife. I was taken at gunpoint from my house. Yes, I was taken at gunpoint over to Royal Victoria Hospital. Taken into Royal Victoria Hospital to see my wife, and they were standing there with the guns on me at the corner. At the very bed where my wife was lying, and they had their guns on me. They marched me like a trooper down the street again. They got me to the bottom of the street and stood me up against the wall and searched me. Made me lie on my face. Then they took me around to the house. When I come round to the house again, they wrecked my home. I had just come round to the house again, they were just away. They wrecked my home. Dogs that I had for our people, they set them free. Baby's clothes, the meter, beds, they tore them apart. The food, they spread it all over the place, searching for it. They went upstairs, bunk beds, took them down. They took the wife's bed down, wardrobes, took all that down. They broke the windows in the back. They're animals, nothing but short, just animals. The Scotch men were walking down the street and they're walking by, got the wee van outside the door, couldn't do enough depredation. They broke every window in the van. They said this'll stop bullets. Then they kept boasting, we'll fix the ARA, we fix the ARA. 4,500 of them, armed with tanks, machine guns, the lot, Saracen cars. They fixed the ARA. 20 or 30 brave men with guns who they tried to murder, which they have murdered, and which they'll continue to murder. That's the British Army. Professionals, professional looters, professional robbers, professional thieves.
It was with the occupation of the Falls Road that the nationalist population began to see the British Army clearly as the enemy, not as a neutral police force. It was also the beginning of what has since become the longest war in the history of English-Irish conflict.
Get that guy now!
Shortly after the Falls Road occupation, guerrilla war started, but it was a new kind of war. By August 1971, the number of monthly bombings had risen to over 90.
They burst on the door about 20 minutes to 5. They didn't wait till we would get up and answer the door. They were in the bedroom before we were dressed. They told my husband, "You're getting arrested under the Special Powers Act."
I am an officer with the Northern Ireland Prison Service. Let me tell you about my job. There's lots of variety, like driving, using modern equipment, escorting prisoners to court, but mostly dealing with people. I work with great mates, and I'm earning over £80 a week, and that's without overtime. The prison service needs people. People like you. Get the facts. Send the coupon from your newspaper now.
Since 1971, virtually every adult in the nationalist ghettos had been arrested and interrogated at least once. In 1978, there were over 3,000 men and women in prisons and prison camps in Ireland and Britain, the largest one being Long Kesh, just outside of Belfast. Through the years, nationalist prisoners have struggled repeatedly using hunger strikes, prison insurrections and escapes in order to assert their rights as prisoners of war. Rights which were recognised by the British government before March 1976, but which have since been denied to all nationalists arrested after that date.
So when internment was introduced in 1971, there was a spontaneous reaction by the nationalist people to this particular repressive measure, which allowed the Republican Army to re-accelerate its war, and the main emphasis within that war was an economic bombing strategy. And the whole emphasis of the armed struggle was a destabilization program to prevent politics, as it had manifested itself within the occupied North, from stabilizing itself and consolidating some sort of base for itself. And that because most of the political parties were already backed by commercial interests, the best way of obtaining that destabilization was with an economic bombing strategy.